we are gathering today in the context of the second high-level meeting, which was held in 2016 in Nairobi, Kenya. And as a product of the second high-level meeting, the major output of that process was the Nairobi outcome document, which spells out renewed commitment by different actors within development cooperation. This is inclusive of government, bilateral, multilateral institutions, parliaments, civil society, amongst other actors. The Nairobi outcome document, for the first time within the framework of GPEDC, which is the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, made an explicit commitment towards youth and children. And the conversation that we are having here is a product of the commitments that were made within the Nairobi outcome document, where young people have been working together to try and bring to practicality what some of those commitments are and could mean in terms of the global monitoring framework that falls under the GPEDC.
Thank you so much, Donald, for that brief background information. I think it is important that we all have that background, because it is important that as young people who are here today, that has been part of the process for the last 6 years, and we're having that training the last 4 days. So we are just trying to ensure that we reaffirm the understanding, and then also for the young people and the children organizations that are following us virtually are able to have an understanding of why this process is very important and why the indicator is key to the youth and children at global level. This brings me to the second question, and this will go to Madam Elsie, just to share with us what has been the political will in driving the process towards the youth indicator. Maybe you can give us a national perspective of Kenya and then also a global perspective.
Thank you very much, Maggie. As my colleague here has been able to mention, that this process is actually anchored in a very global structure. And just to mention that the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation is anchoring its work with the commitment of 161 countries and 56 organizations across the globe. So we can clearly see that sufficiently we have enough political interest towards this. But just to dig deeper into where we started off, in 2016, when we had the second high-level meeting, we ensured that this process was actually driven purely by the commitments of the Kenyan government, where the engagement was actually taking place. So we realized that the government of Kenya has really championed the thematic focus on women and children, and there we see that women, children, and young people were actually centered in this process, and that began the discussion that we currently have. Over the years, as we continue to process the monitoring work and began our work, we realized the commitment of the government of Kenya, Sudan. We also had several engagements with the government of Egypt, and so much so we are seeing that due to their heavy political interest and commitment, then we can garner a bit more support, which we are already enjoying throughout the process.
Thank you, Elsie, for that. So it's clear that at least we are having governments and national perspective that have shown the political will to this process. Now, what are some of the key underpinnings to the work in the development of the youth indicator?
Thank you. So the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation is not operating within a vacuum. It's underpinned in several principles and outcome documents that were developed prior. Remember, we are coming from a place of how can we ensure aid is effective, and now we've moved past that to development effectiveness, meaning that the quality of aid is also under scrutiny. The Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation is actually a multi-stakeholder vehicle that tackles the how this is going to be achieved. And so it is critical for us to have children and young people at the center of the design of these frameworks on utilization of aid and particularly effective development cooperation strategies. So there are critical principles that underpin the piece of work, and these are 4 key principles on transparency and accountability, results, and we are also seeing democratic ownership as very critical in the piece of work that we do. And we see that these principles then guide the work that countries are negotiating in these different spaces. We are almost close to the 3rd high-level meeting, but the piece of work that we'll be doing as children and young people are heavily pegged on that. Not to forget the work, the principles that we as children and youth civil society organizations are working on, and that is the CSO development effectiveness principles. These are our accountability mechanisms that we use. So it's not just us calling for accountability, but we are very cognizant of the power of partnerships in transforming or realizing the sustainable development goals.
Thank you, Elsie. Partnerships is very important for the effectiveness development in the sector. Peggy, so how have the youth and children been participating in the lead-up to the youth indicator process?
Okay, thank you so much. One, I really want to appreciate the fact that this process has given the children and youth, especially the youth, an opportunity to sit around the table. Many times we find that where there are high-level meetings, you don't get an opportunity for young people to deliberately be put to sit on the table. Spaces made for young people to sit on the table and have their views and their voices heard. Yet this process has given the youth an opportunity to do so, not through adults, but themselves to sit on the table and have their views heard, and also given the opportunity for children organizations who are representing children to have their views heard. And this is very, very important as we go along, going out to go and disseminate the indicators.
Thank you so much. So the process is very key because it has given us opportunity to participate in the process and sit on one table. And this brings me to the next question, Peggy. How important is a youth indicator process, and how has the child rights organization participated in the process?
The indicator is very, very important for the children's sector, because this one basically investing in children and youth is critical in achieving inclusive and equitable sustainable development for the present and future generation. And without the youth and children participating in this, it will not really be for the future. It will actually just be for the present. So being able to harness all conventional and innovative forms of financing and public and private, domestic and international financing has really made it very key for the youth to participate in this. So to be able to achieve the gender equality and also to participate of the youth and children organizations has been very, very important on this.
Thank you, Peggy. I think my follow-up question will go to McDonald. Why the youth indicator and what for? Can you highlight more? Why is it that important that this process should go ahead? Mm-hmm. And if at all the GPEDC approves this process, how beneficial will it be to the young people and the children?
All right, so the youth indicator is very important because it answers a critical key question and gap area when it comes to the empowerment and participation of young people. For many, many years, youth have been making a clarion call for them to have a seat on the table. And as Elsie has alluded to, this is a global platform that brings all the key actors in development. And through the youth indicator, we are not just looking at youth contributing to the perspectives that come from the work of GPEDC, but we are increasingly looking at youth becoming a stakeholder within the global partnership for effective development cooperation. And if you are to go to any continent of the world, you will also see and realize that young people make a significant part of the populations within those regions. So it makes perfect sense that we begin to have this conversation around the youth indicator. And the commitments also within the Nairobi outcome document are also very key. We cannot ignore them, and in this particular process, we are guided by them. And you're asking and saying, so what are going to be the benefits of this, youth indicator? We understand that our governments, by being duty bearers at law, they're supposed to provide certain services, they're supposed to provide certain programs that are targeted at the youth. Through the youth indicator, we are trying to begin to put disaggregated data and information that helps us to begin to measure progress on the commitments that have been given towards youth. For instance, within the Nairobi outcome document, there is a commitment which is explicit on empowering and ensuring that youth have decent jobs. What we are trying to do through the youth indicator is to put the kind of questions and indicators that allow action at the national level to begin to measure what is happening when it comes to decent work for youth, when it comes to economic opportunities for youth. And that on its own, it is very instrumental and important, because at the heart of the work that GPEDC does is to also try and motivate behavior change at the national level to ensure that we are all progressively moving towards the commitments which have been set in some of these high-level meetings.
Thank you, McDonald. At the beginning, you mentioned that you are part of the Africa Technical Group.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain more, where does it fit in the youth indicator process?
All right, so the Africa Technical Working Group is a formation that came as a product of the commitment that young people in Africa made after the Nairobi outcome document. And I think it's important for me here to also maybe give emphasis to what Elsie has highlighted in terms of the commitment of the Kenyan government to drive this issue of the youth indicator. And I think when that was clear and apparent, we all did not know where to go and how to start. And because this was a process that was geared and focused on the youth, we had to create mechanisms that could allow youth to sit in the driving seat and begin to drive this particular process. So what it meant was that youth in Africa came together, they conceptualized how they could group and order themselves around coming up with the youth indicator. So the Africa Youth Technical Group has been the main group which has been involved with the technical aspects of coming up with this youth indicator. Because the Nairobi outcome document just sort of like gave us commitments. And those commitments, some people can even look at them as being a wish list. But the work of the Africa Youth Technical Group has been to break the commitments and say, if we're to come up with a youth indicator, what would it look like? What kind of dimensions would it have? What kind of contours would it have? And what kind of data would it seek to collect at the national level? So apart from this Africa Youth Technical Group, the group is also supported by what we're also calling the Advisory Africa Youth Group, which is a group that comes at particular moments where we feel that we need to make critical decisions in the process of coming up with the youth indicator. Like I highlighted earlier, when we started, we had no idea of what the dimensions of the youth indicator were going to be. And at some point, we also had to validate through other young people from different countries on the African continent on what really, the dimensions could be. So you'd find that through these different platforms that were created to ensure that youth take the lead and agency of young people takes the lead, we now have these different platforms that have also been key in terms of driving us to where we are today.
This takes me to Janison. You explained that you are coming from the CPD youth constituency. Can you share more on the Nairobi outcome document, which expressly says concerning youth and children?
Yes, thank you. Yes, there are many dialogues on the civil society globally on how the issues of youth, the civil society works, and the governments need to be brought up. So that was in December 2016 in Nairobi. Again, the civil society, since there are many talks, many discussions that has been going on since 2003 for the civil society, how the civil societies are going to be working, and the collective effort of the civil society need to be, the voice of the civil society need to be heard. So this Nairobi outcome document came out with a specific area laying down about the specific things, specific area of work which the civil society need to be doing. So that lead us on point number 90, that it reads like this, that it reads as we commit, the civil society commit, promote and protect the rights of the children and youth, ensuring that they live free from violence, exploitations and harm in order to develop their full capabilities. And the second point is strengthen capacity and create the space and necessary mechanisms for the meaningful participations of children and youth in the implementations and the monitoring of the 2030 agenda at the local, national and international level. And third point comes up that it promote to productive capacities of youth, expand economic and social opportunities for decent work. So this is what the civil society reiterate to work towards the welfare of the youth and the children. We would take the opportunity to introduce the CPD. CPD stands CSO's, Civil Societies Organizations Partnership for Development Effectiveness. So this was founded in 2012 in Nairobi. This from around the world, it started with about only 50 civil society organizations, but further with the commitment and the work which the civil society wanted it to be implemented, so more and more civil society comes into force, and we are now able to work in 117 countries, and our members come from 6 regions and 8 major sectors which the CPD is working. That is on the faith-based organizations, the faith-based, feminist, indigenous people, international CSOs, labor, migrant, rural, and the youth. So these are some of the the sectors which the CPD is working. So together we strive for a more effective development, the kind that truly respond to poverty and inequality. So towards this end, we promote the human rights-based approach to development, uphold accountability in development corporations, and build the capacity of the civil society to engage in various advocacy arenas. So in all these endeavors, we are driven by the aspirations and struggles of the impoverished and marginalized, and the vision of free and equal world from all.
How important are the Istanbul principles as we link them to the youth indicator process?
All right, so the Istanbul principles are very important in the work of developing the youth indicator, because when you talk about the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, it is guided by the Busan principles, which have already been given reference to, and these apply more to governments because they take the lead. And civil society is considered an actor in development. And when we come to the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, we are bound by the Istanbul principles. In essence, they represent what we as civil society are putting on the table to the GPEDC and to everyone else to say that this is who we are, and these are the kind of principles that our work is guided by. And some of those principles have to do with issues of accountability and transparency, gender equality. Within also those principles, you'd also find that the issue of environmental sustainability is also key. And you'd find that in the work that civil society organizations are doing across the world, all of these themes are very key in what we do, because then this is also what we committed to do as civil society in responding to issues around development cooperation and development effectiveness around the world. So you'd find that they have been very instrumental in terms of our agency around the youth indicator, Because ultimately what we are doing in coming up with the youth indicator, we are trying to answer to the question of accountability, but in this particular instance, we are more focused on youth and children to say what is happening at the national level. And as civil society, we also play that watchdog role to our governments. So it will empower us, it will position us to also begin to answer, to sort of like pose critical questions to our governments within the monitoring framework of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation.
Great. So we just had a training of country focal points. So what next now to those that are being trained at country level and at global level?
So the country focal point training, it's a really key stage in the work of coming up with the youth indicator, because within the training, not only did we seek to validate our dimensions and contours and gain more information around how the youth indicator is structured and how we can begin to collect data at the national level. Because when you look at the monitoring work that is done within the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, at the heart of it, it's also the idea of generating evidence to show that there is progress. So you'd find that through the country focal point training, we have come together as young people, not only from Africa, we have representation for youth from Asia, from North America, from Europe. And the idea is that from this training, we are now going to take our indicator, which is the youth indicator, to our respective governments within our national countries. We are also taking it to development partners. We are also taking it to civil society, because these are going to be the key actors that are going to have to provide data at the national level in terms of what is going to be going on. So in essence, this is a very key and landmark moment in terms of the work of coming up with the youth indicator. And our hope is that when we go to do country work, we will generate evidence and data that we can use to continue our lobby for this youth indicator within the framework of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation.
Thank you so much, McDonald. Elsie, you are from Kenya. Can you tell us how instrumental has been the Nairobi outcome document?
So the Nairobi outcome document, having gained its prominence or its mandate in Nairobi, we realized that we have gotten some critical gains through the commitments that we've already been realized. But what is so critical for us is the commitment of the political will that we're experiencing right now from the government. When we began this journey, we realized that it would not be a one-man journey, it would not be a one-man show, it would not be effectively attained or realized if we do not develop a strong partnership. So we really, if this is one process that has really embodied the essence of the GPEDC, why as a multi-stakeholder vehicle towards the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, we have embraced the ups, the downs, the challenges and the opportunities that come with that form of partnership. And so for us as the Kenyan population, and particularly the Kenyan youth and children's organizations, there have been such amazing opportunities to plug in, and one of them has been through this kind of process that we are doing, but also we are taking back all the lessons and the learnings that have been carried forward to develop not only this global indicator, but also to infuse the process of a more Kenyan index that already has started to be developed across the board. Furthermore, we also are utilizing this space to ensure that with the gains that have been brought about due to the index, that we can be able to measure and impact, to actually impact the kind of work that not only governments do, but also civil society organizations will be doing, that also what the development partners would also sufficiently contribute to. So for us, we are looking at how are we domesticating this. Ours is not only a global process but it is very locally led. So we are going to ensure we are using existing national structures that will allow for not only ownership, but also sustainability of the process across the board here.
Thank you so much for that. We're able to see that the Kenyans are really pushing that agenda that has not only benefited you as a country, it's something that keeps spilling over out to other nations and the global at large. Peggy, how best can we make sure that this is achieved?
Well, thank you so much. I would like to say that the training has been really, really, really interesting and very informative. And it has really been able to rally the youth. The fact that the youth were the ones seated there and are the ones who are going to go back and be able to be the focal point of just going to pass out this message and getting the information from the donor, the government, and the CSO is really a big issue. And the fact that the training has targeted different countries coming in has been very, very important. As for children organizations and youth working organization, it has given us an opportunity to be able to understand the whole process, how we are going to be able to go back and gather the information that we want to place in the indicator, be able to process the information that comes out of all that and analyze that information and be able to come up with a country-led information from the different organizations. It has prepared us for that. I feel prepared. There are challenges, of course, that we are going to encounter as young people and children organizations as we go back. Yeah, challenges are there. And the fact that we are young people and sometimes we feel inadequate, the young people feel inadequate to be able to go out there and get the information that is required. Or sometimes the fact that we are the young people, you're despised sometimes that, what can you tell us? But we have been trained and we feel adequate enough to be able to go out there and get the information, and we've been told we can get to any office because they owe us to give us the information. So we feel ready and adequate to go out there.
Can you highlight more where are we collecting this data from? Which institutions, sectors? Okay,
so we have three levels. We have the government, whereby the focal point will be the treasury. Yeah, so you have the government. So the treasury will be the focal point. We're going to gather information from them. Then we have the donor society, the civil society, whereby we are going to gather information from the donors. Then we have the civil society, at the local, and Elsie talked about the process being very local led, whereby we are going down to the community, the civil society there. So we have the civil society, we have the donor, and we have the government. That's where we're going to get the information from.
Thank you. And this brings me to a last question that I expect each one of you to respond to. How beneficial do you see the youth indicator?
The youth indicator, for me, from the children's sector, is very, very beneficial. Because one, it shows the importance of children in development. Because without children, we cannot have youth, neither can we have adults. So the youth and children are very key. So it shows the importance of children in development. And also the youth indicator gives us an opportunity to gather data on what the development partners, on what the donors are doing and the CSOs are doing as pertains to budgeting and programming and the development efforts that are putting there for the purposes of developing children and young people. So for me, that is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoever is ready can take it us. Elsie?
For me, this process is very critical. Why? Because it defines a mechanism as to which we can measure the work and the many initiatives that we are carrying out across Africa on children and young people. And not only across Africa, but beyond the continent. What we cannot actually measure, we cannot manage. Mm-hmm. And what we cannot manage, we cannot drive impact towards. So our point and our focus is that we are able to utilize this indicator as a tool that can be embraced equally, not only by governments, the donor society or civil society, to just realize the impact that we've constantly been pushing for. Most times we do not have the mechanisms as to which to do this, but we are telling the world that we have this mechanism now. It has taken us 3 years to develop this mechanism, and we can be sure that it will be very sufficient and important towards not only towards the multi-stakeholder engagement of children and young people, towards development effectiveness. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Maggie. So at the heart of the work for coming up with the youth indicator is really to ensure that youth also become a part of the monitoring framework, and that is going to be very instrumental because within that primary platform that looks at issues of development cooperation, it is going to be possible for us to see what is happening at the national level in terms of youth and children. And when we look at both sectors, they make significant amounts of our population, and in most cases they're considered to be vulnerable and marginalized and would require some form of targeted support. So we are hoping that through this process we can see the lives and the realities of our youth and our children across the world improving, and our governments being more accountable to the commitment to improve the lives that they live. And I think something that I can also maybe just say as the last point is to say that we are also trying to ensure that youth have representation, that within the global partnership, youth also have a voice where they can participate in monitoring rounds, they can give an idea of what is happening at the national level in terms of the commitments made towards them. And that on its own is very instrumental, because through that we are giving voice, we are giving agency, and we are ensuring that our youth are part of taking the lead.
Thank you, McDonald. Johnson?
Yes, thank you once again, Maggie. For this indicator, I would appreciate then the ROA Africa for their endless effort, to develop this indicator process. So we all know that the largest population is the children and the youth. Mm-hmm. So this indicator, we know through this indicator we will be able to assess how much the actors, the role of the civil society, the role of the government, and how the international financial institutions and the donor organizations are, what role they are actually playing. We know that there are multiple, there are large budget being embarked for the youth and the children, and we also see many activities being initiated by various countries. So this indicator will enhance, will give us something that we could access, that how these funds, how these activities are being implemented, and if there are some loopholes around then this indicator, we will be able to identify it, and different dialogues can be brought up between the civil society, the donors, and the government. So this is what we feel, this is what I feel that this indicator will help in our this coming future.
Thank you so much. I always say that there has never been a successful revolution without the young people. That's how courageous, that's how vibrant we are. So with this process, we have a huge opportunity to contribute effectively to the youth indicator process. Before we close, I will just invite 3 questions from the audience for our panelists. 3 questions, please. Be brief, only 1 question.
Yeah, mine it's not a question per se, but just a comment to emphasize the points that the panelists have been able to raise. It is a known fact that youth and children constitutes the big chunk of our population, and we are a democratic dividend. In that regard, we cannot talk about development effectiveness if we continue to ignore the big chunk of our population, which is very productive, energetic, and active. And then probably time is here now when we need to move away from the narrative that categorizes youth and children as a marginalized society, as a special interest group. These are key and very energetic actors that can contribute effectively to the development of our nation. So I needed to emphasize that. Thank you.
Henry Kawa. I wanted to find out from the panelists how we make sure that these processes reach the people within their countries for them to be able to effectively hold their governments accountable, that it's not just among donors, governments, and civil society, but that the processes are understood on the ground for them, for the general citizenry to hold their governments accountable. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Henry, for the question. So the whole idea of the country focal point training is to ensure that, or rather, it reveals that a mapping of countries has already been done. And because we are trying to test and collect data that we're going to use in our continual lobby and advocacy for this youth indicator, you would find that by identifying the different focal points, they're either coming from a youth organization or a child rights organization. So it means they belong to a respective country. They also know their local context, and they have considerable relations with each of these stakeholders, which is the government, the development partners, and with civil society organizations. And traditionally, we all understand that the work of civil society organizations is to be the interlocutor between the government and the citizens. Where a civil society, we champion the issues that are coming from the bottom. So you'd find that through this process, we will be able to pick the local voices. We will be able to match the commitment from both the development partners and the government. And we believe that through this process, it should drive us towards asking ourselves a critical question of how we can change our behavior to ensure that we give more, and more is done towards children and youth in terms of improving their lives. And it also must be important for us to all understand that at the heart of this is to ensure that we eradicate poverty. And when we look at who is affected the most by poverty, it comes back again to children and youth. But I think, as one of the colleagues has highlighted too, through this youth indicator, we are also trying to change the narrative, where we now begin to look at youth and children as actors, as agents of change, and as people that are not just vulnerable and marginalized.
This brings us to the end of our session today, and I just want to encourage you that you like our page on Facebook, the Youth Indicator, and then also on Twitter, it's the Youth Indicator. Please you follow us closely, and then also share the links widely so that we could have a huge number of following. But maybe before that, under 1 minute, any closing words? Starting with Elsie, and we'll end with just Johnson.
My closing words would really tackle the aspect of the power of partnerships can really transform the work that we do across the board with children and youth organizations. If we can harness that power, then we are definitely on the road towards a better continent, a better society, a better globe. And particularly if we ensure we can harness those partnerships at the local level, then we can translate it into global wins.
I'll just give a quote. This quote was said by Stacia Stolscher, a dancer and an artist. She said, "We worry about what a child will become tomorrow, yet we forget that he or she is someone today." So by engaging children and youth today, we are actually taking care of tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, I think in closing, I would give reference to a Yoruba proverb which says that where you will sit when you are old shows where you stood in youth. And I think for the longest time, the narrative that youth must be on the table has gone for the longest. Through this process, we are hoping to look 10 years backwards and not have the same challenge. Youth are now standing up, they are fully represented, and they have contributed in terms of taking the world and our communities to a better place.
Thank you. Johnson?
Yes, lastly, I would say that before closing it down, CPD always has a commitment to work better for the civil society organizations and for the marginalized section of the society. So, as being a youth sector, for the implementation of this indicator, we would extend our full support, and we will give our effort on how this effective implementation of this indicator is being implemented in many of the countries where we are working. So that is one thing, and without the effort of the people, without the struggle of the people, nothing could be achieved. So lastly, long live international solidarity, long live people's movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank the panelists for the discussion which we had. That was very informative. And I want to say thank you to the audience, the questions, for your attention and listening. I think that this is great. That this is where we end. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Oh,